Theresa May declared Britain's best days really lie ahead of usThe Prime Minister will lay out an ambitious vision of what our future economic partnership with the EU should look like after the Cabinet's Brexit committee finally reached a consensus on our preferred end state. Mrs. May said yesterday, the deal we negotiate with the EU must present an ambitious future for our great country. Next week I will present the committee's conclusions to an additional session of the full cabinet before travelling to the northeast on Friday to give a speech setting out this government's vision of what our future economic partnership with the European Union should look like. Delivering the best Brexit is about our national future, part of the way we improve the lives of people all over the country. So I concluded the meeting by reminding the committee that the decisions we make now will shape this country for a generation. If we get them right, Brexit will be the beginning of a bright new chapter in our national story, and our best days really do lie ahead of us. Our best days really do lie ahead of us. Theresa May. The speech, her third major Brexit address after Lancaster House and Florence, comes after unity broke out between ministers at Chequers on Thursday. They agreed to proceed with what insiders have described as a pragmatic Brexit, allowing Britain to diverge from EU laws and strike trade deals with other countries. Brexit Secretary David Davis is thought to have played a critical role in the talks that the Prime Minister's country retreat, with one source revealing how he took back control while sitting in the hot seat opposite Mrs. May in front of the Chequers fireplace. David has come very firmly back into the ring. This is his view of how Brexit should be done, and he got everyone on board, said the insider. Mrs. May was described as playing a blinder during the 8th-hour crunch meeting, where the group agreed the UK should retain its sovereignty and not accept changes imposed unilaterally by Brussels, another source close to the talks said. Although no one could have claimed to have won all the arguments, the Brexiteers in the room were certainly emboldened by the fact that Mrs. May appeared to be listening to David Davis first and foremost, not Ollie Robbins and Jeremy Hayward. Mr. Davis's role as the UK's chief negotiator has been called into question after Mr. Robbins was moved from the Department for Exiting the EU to become Mrs. May's personal Brexit advisor. It is thought staunch Remainer Mr. Robbins had been leading calls for Britain to remain in the Customs Union, a stance rejected unequivocally on Thursday after International Trade Secretary Liam Fox said the government would struggle to justify ploughing millions of pounds of taxpayers' money into his department if Britain was unable to strike trade deals with non-EU countries. Dr. Fox is giving his own trade speech on Tuesday, part of the government's Roadmap to Brexit series, which has seen Mr. Davis and Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson outline the Posley vision. Cabinet Secretary Sir Jeremy is also believed to have been a thorn in Mr. Davis's side, advocating the close alignment favoured by Chancellor Philip Hammond and Home Secretary Amber Rudd, both Remainers. Modivat Davis, sitting next to Theresa May, is said to have re-established control. Mrs. May's view throughout the talks was said to be closer to the Boris Johnson position than the Philip Hammond one, with divergence winning the day. The agreement was welcomed last night by leading Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg. He called on the EU chief negotiator Michel Barnier to recognise the mutually beneficial nature of what the UK was proposing after EU Council. President Donald Tusk immediately poured cold water on the plans, describing them as pure illusion. Mr. Tusk accused Britain of trying to cherry-pick its future relationship with the EU, saying the cake philosophy is still alive in the UK. He also rejected the idea of the UK being able to join their single market à la carte. Mr. Rees-Mogg, who chairs the influential European research group of about 100 Eurosceptic Tory MPs, described Mr. Tusk as an ivory-headed dictatorial bureaucrat, and called on Mr. Barnier to compromise. As a European federalist ideologue, of course Mr. Tusk doesn't want to give Britain anything. He's a very good reminder of why we voted to leave in the first place, he said, Monday, February 5, 2018. Michel Barnier and David Davis head to Downing Street for lunch meeting. Mrs. May could do with reminding Mr. Tusk that if we do leave without a deal then the EU may not be left with enough money to pay his salary. We have been building bridges only for Mr. Barnier to break them down. And frankly that approach isn't going to get the EU anywhere. Earlier this month Mr. Barnier was forced to apologize for the inappropriate wording of a clause in the EU's draft transition documents calling for Britain to be punished if it refused to follow EU laws during the time-limited period. Diplomats from the remaining 27 member states reacted with horror at the suggestion, fearing it could collapse the negotiations after Mr. Davis branded the clause discourteous. The rare mea culpa from Brussels was taken as a sign of the Commission's desperation to maintain the EU's painstakingly constructed united front in the face of Brexit. The transition deal needs to be endorsed by both sides by the next EU Council meeting on March 22 and 23 so trade talks can begin in April. The withdrawal agreement then needs to be finalized by October 19 so it can be presented and ratified by Member States, Parliament and the European Parliament ahead of the January 2019 deadline. Britain officially leaves the EU on March 29, 2019, and the transition period ends on December 31, 2020.